Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today is Sunday, so we are doing breaches of the week. And as always, I'd like to start by thanking the following people that sent me a lot of this information, and that would be Barrett Peterson, Chris Fallon, Keith Richards, though I assume not that Keith Richards, Bill Salter, and Tina Godray, and thank you so very much. And if you have a tip for me, please feel free to send it my way, and I'll give you a shout out here and also on my nationally syndicated radio show. And with that, let's get started. There are a ton of breaches this week, and we're going to start with EA, or Electronic Arts. This is specifically revolving around their FIFA Ultimate Team game. Now, EA has attributed a recent series of takeovers of high-profile accounts of FIFA Ultimate Team players to quote-unquote human error within its customer service experience team, some of whom apparently fell prey to a socially engineered phishing attack after a number of top traders of FIFA's game last week reported that their accounts had been taken over and cleared of points and thousands of dollars of in-game currency. EA launched an investigation. The company discovered that phishers had managed to quote-unquote exploit human error among EA's customer support staff and compromised less than 50 top trader accounts, and that is according to a blog post they wrote this past Tuesday. So heads up, if you play EA's FIFA Ultimate Team, you might want to check your account. Moving on. Let's talk about the Maryland Department of Health. They are dealing with a major ransomware attack that left hospitals struggling amid obviously a surge of COVID-19 cases thanks to Omicron. In a statement released this past Wednesday, Maryland Chief Information Security Officer Chip Stewart said the attack began on December 4th and crippled their systems. Mr. Stewart went on to explain that the health department's network team noticed a server malfunctioning in the early morning of December 4. They eventually escalated it to the IT security team, which later notified Mr. Stewart that it may be a ransomware attack. It's taken them weeks, obviously, to recover from this, and it has slowed the reporting of Omicron numbers from what I've read, and so they've had to tabulate a lot of that by hand. Obviously, ransomware is no fun, so hopefully Maryland's Department of Health is fully back on their feet at this point. We're rooting for you. Moving on. Heads up Linux users. The operators of the S-File ransomware, also known as Escal, have apparently ported their malware to work and encrypt files on Linux-based operating systems. Attacks with this new Linux variant were just spotted late last year thanks to Chinese security firm Rising in a report that they just released last week, and it was confirmed by The Record with the Malware Hunter team, one of the people behind the ID ransomware project. Now, despite the appearance of this Linux port, the number of S-File attacks remains small in scale compared to active families that typically target Windows, such as Conti, Lockbit, Grief, and Stop. So, huge issue there. If you're running Linux, heads up to you. You are not immune from this. It's the same with all you Apple people. Just because you're running a different non-Windows operating system doesn't mean you don't have threat out there. And we've seen infected Apple and Linux devices throughout the years, and it is becoming more and more prevalent. And with that, let's move on, because I want to give you an update on one breach that I talked about a few weeks ago, and that would be Nordic Choice Hotels. Now, if you recall, they basically were a victim of ransomware on December 2nd when attackers encrypted some of their internal systems, and apparently Conti ransomware was behind this. Now, in a press release the other day, Nordic Choice said that instead of contacting the attackers and negotiating for a decryption key, they essentially decided to move their entire PC fleet from Windows to Google's Chrome OS. So that may lower the population of infections out there, as I mentioned for Nordic Hotel, but Linux infections are out there and growing, and they're on the rise. And literally the last thing I talked about was the S-File ransomware essentially being ported to Linux. So heads up, Nordic Hotel, you still need good threat detection at your perimeter and ideally on your endpoints. Moving on, let's talk about the nonprofit charity here in the United States, and I actually think the world. They are known as Goodwill. They unfortunately also had to disclose a data breach this past week that affected the accounts of customers using its shopgoodwill.com e-commerce auction platform. Now, Shop Goodwill's Vice President Ryan Smith said in a data breach notification letter that was sent to impacted individuals that some of their personal contact information was exposed due to a site vulnerability. Mr. Smith added that no payment information was exposed in this incident because Shop Goodwill does not store this kind of data on their servers. The nonprofit has now fixed that vulnerability that led to that exposure, so hopefully there we are. But if you've used shopgoodwill.com, for whatever needs, heads up, you might want to check in. Moving on, let's talk about the South Georgia Medical Center. And this is actually an interesting one, because a former employee has been arrested in that November data breach case at the South Georgia Medical Center. Ron Dean, the hospital's president and CEO, said this past Thursday that a worker, quote unquote, left employment with SGMC, the hospital, on November 11th. And on November 12th, security software put out an alert that there had been an unauthorized download of data by an employee. The information left the building on a USB flash drive. The data was limited. It only involved such things as names, dates of birth, test results, and not financial data or social security numbers or medical records. So it's limited in scope, but nevertheless, the files had not been erased, just downloaded, so no information was lost or potentially lost by the hospital. Now, the employee at the heart of this investigation had legitimate access to these files, according to that CEO. The files were recovered. Now, a 43-year-old female and former SGMC employee is charged with felony computer theft and felony computer invasion of privacy, according to a sheriff's office statement in that area. And the motive for this is unknown at the moment, but obviously that's a huge thing. Looks like their DLP, or data loss prevention system, kicked in and showed them exactly what they wanted to see. That's why we all need good DLP and ideally DRM, digital rights management solutions, in our lives, corporate and personal. Moving on. Let's talk about the Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail Limited Corporation out of India. They are facing a data breach on their portal, and the company is investigating this incident. Now, meanwhile, the company has assured that it will have no operational or business impact on its operations. Over 5.4 million email addresses were accessed online from the portal of the Aditya Birla Group-owned company. And there you go. So if you shop at Aditya Birla out of India, you definitely want to check in your email address. Hopefully that's it. May have been exposed. Moving on. Let's talk about the Tennessee-based QRS, which provides EHR, or electronic health record systems for basically medical outfits. And this is actually an update from one from a while back. They actually got sued this past week after a cyber attack led to the exposure of 319,778 people. And I quote plaintiff Matthew Tincher in a class action complaint that was filed in U.S. District Court this past Monday. QRS failed to reasonably secure, monitor, and maintain the protected health information and personally identifiable information stored on its patient portal. So we'll see where that goes. I remember reporting on that one, I want to say like 6 months ago or something like that. But we'll see what happens. But if you use QRS for all your EHR needs, you may be entitled to compensation. Moving on, let's talk about the Medical Review Institute of America, or MRIOA. They may have exposed the personal data of 134,571 individuals, and we are talking first and last name, gender, home address, phone number, email, date of birth, social security. Additionally, the information impacted may have also included clinical information such as medical history, diagnosis, treatment, dates of service, lab results, prescription information, provider name, and medical account number. Also, financial information including health insurance policy and group plan number. Group plan provider claimed information may also be involved in this situation. So if you have anything to do with the Medical Review Institute of America, you definitely want to check that out. Moving on, let's talk about Oscar Health. I don't have much on this at this time, but a printing vendor apparently exposed Oscar Health's information. This was disclosed this past Friday, a couple of days ago, and as soon as I have anything else on this, I will definitely let you know, but heads up already, Oscar Health patients and employees. Moving on. Let's talk about Poland's defense ministry, because they said this past Friday that a massive leak from a military equipment database includes only publicly available information and is not actually harmful. Now, the defense ministry of Poland said that the database found online is a list from a body responsible for making purchases for Poland's military. In preliminary findings, it blamed the leak on negligence by an employee of the inspectorate responsible for the purchases. So outside of understanding, I guess, what the Polish military is actually buying, no harm, no foul, and hopefully that's as far as it goes. God forbid somebody adversarial to Poland gets hold of that list and sees exactly what they're doing and what's going on. Nevertheless, here we are. Moving on, let's talk about the Visalia Unified School District, because on December 30th, the VUSD announced a certain district issued email certain district issued email accounts, were illegally accessed during a data breach between January 1st and June 3rd, so between January and June of last year. Now, VUSD said in a statement that it identified this problem on June 6th, 3 days after June 3rd. The result of this 6-month investigation determined that most of the information obtained was the name and medical information of the email account holder. In the case of 10 email accounts, information obtained also included driver's license numbers, financial account number, and health insurance information. So if you have anything to do with the Visalia Unified School District, meaning you're an employee of the district itself, you might want to check in. I'm sure they've already notified you. Moving on. Let's talk about the Commission on Elections, or COMELEC, in the Philippines. Now, the National Bureau of Investigation in that country has started its probe into alleged hacking and basically a possible data breach at the Commission of Elections. This development comes after a report from the Manila Bulletin claimed basically that essentially that group, COMELEC, had been hacked and compromised, which led to files being stolen, including usernames and PINs of vote counting machines. This is an ongoing investigation. I don't have more than that, but obviously if somebody broke in and stole all of the logins to all of the voting machines in some which way, shape, or form, that is a major, major breach of election security for that country, and hopefully they've got good security. Here in the United States, I don't even have to start with that. We also need to up our security despite everything we've seen. So with that, let's move on, because I've got another one for you. And that is REvil or REvil. This is an update. Now, I actually did a video/podcast on this the other day, and I'm going to be talking about this tomorrow on my radio show. But here we go. This is the recap of the more in-depth video I did like a day or two ago. The Russian Federal Security Service, or FSB, said on January 14th that it had raided and shut down the operations of the REvil or REvil ransomware gang. Now, raids were conducted today at 25, or I should say on January 14th, at 25 residents owned by 14 members suspected to be part of the REvil team across Moscow, St. Petersburg, Leningrad, and Lipsk regions. Authorities said that they seized more than 426 million rubles, 600,000 in cash in US, and 500,000 euros in cash, along with cryptocurrency wallets, computers, and 20 high-end luxury exotic cars. The FSB, which serves as Russia's internal intelligence agency, said it conducted the operation at the request of US authorities, which were notified of the results. His raid also comes after President Biden and U.S. authorities have begun putting pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin repeatedly over the summer to crack down on Russian underground cybercrime ecosystems, which harbors many of today's top ransomware crews. I've done videos in this, and if you want more in-depth information on this, go check out my video from, I think, like 3 days ago, not 2 days ago. But this is a huge, huge thing, because it dovetails into one of the finales that I want to talk about, and that is Ukraine, because the Ukrainian government has got some serious issues going on right now. If you didn't know, Russia's basically amassed about 100,000 soldiers at their border. Again, check out my video/podcast from the other day to talk about more in depth in that one, because I want to talk specifically here about data breaches, and so there we are. So here's what's going on from the data breach perspective. On or around January 14th, the Ukrainian government servers were hit by a quote-unquote massive cyber attack over that night that saw government websites taken down, including the homepage for the foreign ministry, which temporarily displayed a message warning Ukraine's people to, quote, be afraid and expect the worst. Just hours before that digital sabotage, Ukraine's ambassador in Washington, D.C., talking to CBS News, said that her country believed a cyber attack would precede any major military action by Vladimir Putin's forces. There was no claim of responsibility for the cyber attack, but Ukraine has blamed groups with links to the Russian government for similar and previous sabotage. And obviously, we're still watching this. And my deep dive segment tomorrow on my nationally syndicated radio show is going to be on exactly that. The entire situation I kind of spelled out a few days ago, and I highly recommend, if you're interested in that, to go watch that, because I think it involves REvil, it involves obviously cyber attacks, it involves a possible military invasion, and there's an entire thing where I actually lay out theories of where this could go and what this could do, and I'm going to be even more in-depth tomorrow on my radio show for that, so you don't want to miss that either. Moving on. Our next, finally, that we want to talk about here is the FCC, or Federal Communications Commission, and data breach reporting rules. This is an important one. Now, following a series of hacks and data leaks at U.S. telecom companies, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, has proposed on January 12th a series of changes to its data breach notification requirements. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and here we go. The backdrop is FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosen-Worcel, who published the proposal rules earlier that day, said that the agency needs to update its existing reporting rules to, and I quote, fully reflect the evolving nature of data breaches and the real-time threat they pose to affected consumers, which often learn of data breaches long after they have occurred. I just talked about that. That school district found that out on June 6th, and we are now just talking about it 7 months later. Obviously a huge issue. Now, to achieve this, the FCC believes that by eliminating a 7 business day waiting period that is granted to telecom companies before notifying customers of a breach is a good step in this direction. The direct consequence of removing this current waiting period will be that telecom companies can notify customers of a breach as soon as it happens if they are in a capability of doing so and haven't been told by law enforcement agencies to wait until an investigation has been completed. In addition, the FCC wants telecoms to be required to notify customers of inadvertent data leaks as well, not only situations where a malicious and intentional act was involved, meaning somebody accidentally forgot to check the security box and expose the whole dang database to the world so that anybody that knows the address can go read it. Verizon, I'm talking to you. Now, this means that telecoms will have to notify customers of situations where, as I mentioned, they accidentally left all of this open. Furthermore, the FCC wants telecommunication providers to notify its agency as well about any kind of breach, not just the FBI and the Secret Service. Now, I have thoughts on this one, good and bad. I am all for transparency. I am all for learning about data breaches, but here's the thing. There has to be a balance between informing consumers immediately versus starting a panic. And I will give you this example from this. Now, this is not a telecom example, but in 2021, one of the most spectacular data breaches that we saw was the Colonial pipeline data breach. Now, here's the thing. As you recall, and I talked about this, especially if you're a longtime listener or viewer, Colonial, the pipeline itself wasn't actually hit. It was their billing system. They couldn't figure out how to bill the distributors that were receiving the gas. So instead of figuring that out later with their insurance company, they went ahead and just shut the pipeline off because they didn't know how to bill. Now, here's the thing. If this had never been reported, the gas stations that were receiving gas from the distributors that are getting the gas from the Colonial pipeline, which serves something like 45% of basically all gas in the United States and almost the entire eastern seaboard of the United States, if nobody had known about that, we would not have had a national panic. People would not have been rushing out. Prices would not have spiked. We would not have seen that problem in 2021. They took a few days to unstick or unscrew their billing system, basically get that back up and running. They turn the gas on. And in that interim, gas stations that actually had the gas would have been fine. But here we are. This basically got leaked to the news. The news said, oh my God, the gas is down across the entire eastern seaboard. Holy cow. And everybody freaked out and ran to the gas station. That is a very serious problem. I'm not saying consumers can't be notified. What I'm saying is there has to be an understanding that if we notify people right now, it can cause a panic versus if we notify people right now, it just sucks. They're part of yet another data breach that's out there. And there has to be, I think, a discerning of that there. Now, if an AT&T or Verizon or, pick your cellular carrier or mobile carrier or telecom carrier gets out and says, yeah, we got everybody's data breached, again, it's probably not going to be a national panic. But when you're talking about things like critical infrastructure, the last thing that you want to hear is, maybe it's very quiet where, let's say, one of these gets hit and they have a possible outage that might be rolling, through their infrastructure periodically. But if the news gets wind of it and says, yeah, all cell phones are going down for a week, people will freak out. This is the problem that I'm talking about. We are not receiving accurate information sometimes, or we're receiving hyperbolic information, or we are receiving completely accurate information that, quite frankly, probably shouldn't get out until the situation is resolved, because the situation will be resolved fast enough to stop that panic. And I would rather hear this happened 3 days ago, no harm, no foul, but if it hadn't, boom, we would have this huge problem versus, oh my God, the world is on fire. but it's fixed in 3 days. That's the difference. And so as long as we are baking that into the equation here, I'm totally cool with it, but there you go. So with that, that is the last thing I want to talk about here. I am glad the FCC is stepping up the breach game. Again, we need transparency. I am overall for these kinds of things, but there is that caveat. We don't want to cause national panics, and I think most of you would agree with me. And so those were your breaches of the week. Were you affected? Let me know. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.